Hey ladies, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, we are going to talk about two nutrition trends that I see on social media by different influencers. And I wanted to talk about them because I want you to think about if it's something that you should be doing or if it's something that is just left for social media. When it comes to nutrition, everybody has an opinion on it. I hear my family members have opinions on it and friends and all these people, and they might be in the medical field, but they don't have any nutrition experience. I'm a dietitian. I study nutrition. So we're going to talk about some of the opinions out there based on two particular things that I see on social media. First one is adding a pinch of salt to your water every day. And the second one is really teasing through the information out there about diet sodas, the different studies about it. And the goal of all of this is for you to decide what works for you based on your family history, based on the things that are happening in your life and what your current medical condition looks like. One of the things that social media doesn't really tell us is that a lot of these influencers and people that are spewing a lot of stuff on social media, which then adds to misinformation, is that they are probably healthy individuals. And if you're over a certain age, especially if you're a woman over 40, and you are either perimenopausal or menopausal, your body is going to start going through things. You might start getting diagnosed, or you're worrying about different diseases, primarily diabetes, high blood pressure. And so I want to make sure that we talk this information through so that you can make an informed decision about what is best for you. I am in no way telling you that you should or should not be doing something, because I can't give that kind of information on a podcast. If I saw you individually, it would be different. So I want you to really be able to start to ask yourself some questions and to tease out what is best for you based on all of the information out there, as opposed to just a little viewpoint and a little snippet that you see on social media. And then you question like, oh, should I be doing this? We're going to talk about that today. Welcome to the Whole Health Empowerment Project podcast. This show is for women over 40 who are trying to create balance in their life when it comes to food, body, self-care, and wellness. You struggle to put yourself first, to maintain consistency when something isn't perfect, or maybe you feel like you don't have enough time or willpower to achieve the goals you desire. I'm your host, Trisha Stefankowitz, registered dietitian, nutritionist. I've worked with women like you achieve their goals by focusing on the next best step, no matter how messy, and meeting you where you are right now. In this show, you'll learn practical information, actionable strategies, and mindset tweaks so that you can feel healthier, more comfortable in your body, and make choices that work for your life. Come join me in failing forward, one imperfect step at a time, into the journey of health, wellness, and self-care. Welcome to your new project. One of the things that drives me the most insane that I see on social media is this claim about adding salt to your water. So that's the first one we're going to talk about. And the second one we're going to talk about is diet soda. We're going to just talk about the facts, and then you can choose whatever works for you. So when we talk about the salt, adding salt to your water, this drives me crazy. And why it drives me crazy is because I'm partial, because I've worked with heart disease. I've worked with dialysis patients, which I currently do. And so I am always telling people, and we're talking about ways to minimize salt in your diet. And so then when I see somebody who's out there saying, add a pinch of salt, it's great, it's going to do this, I want you to remember that these people probably don't have a history of high blood pressure, which has been linked to too much salt. And so there are people that are able to do some of these things that perhaps maybe you're not able to do. And that's why we're going to talk about this today. So let's talk about this pinch of salt. So just a reminder that when you're using salt, it doesn't matter what kind of salt you're using. Some people claim that Himalayan salt is healthier than regular table salt, or that the Celtic or Celtic salt has more nutrition value. They're all the same. All salt is going to harm you in doses that are higher than what you require. And so if you're adding any bit of salt and you're somebody who has high blood pressure, it's going to worsen your blood pressure. So let's talk about this idea of adding salt to your diet or adding it to your water every morning. We know that the claim here is that if you are adding salt to your water every day, it's typically like a pinch of salt. So it can be like as little as like an eighth of a teaspoon. And the claim is that it helps with dehydration or it helps detox and cleanse your body. And we know that if you're eating too much salt, you are at risk for getting high blood pressure, also known as hypertension. And this just means that the pressure in your blood vessels is too high. And for most people, that tends to be 140/90. And why it's important to talk about this is that according to the World Health Organization, there is an estimated 1.28 billion adults aged 30 to 79 worldwide who have high blood pressure, also known as hypertension. And a lot of these, 2/3 of these people that are living with high blood pressure are living in a low and middle income countries. We know that about 46% of adults with high blood pressure aren't even aware that they have high blood pressure. And so it's one of those things that we don't want to be adding even more salt if you're already in a place where you're at risk for having high blood pressure or that you're unaware that you have high blood pressure. And the only way to help that would be to lower your salt intake, go see your doctor and see if they also need to prescribe you some medications to help lower your blood pressure levels. So let's talk about the truth here about these claims of helping with dehydration and help detoxing and cleanse. We know that a teaspoon of salt, so 1 teaspoon of salt, is about the amount of salt that's more than we want people to have every day. So about a teaspoon of salt is about 2,300 milligrams of salt. So if you're having a pinch of that, you're probably having about like 300 milligrams of salt, also known as sodium. For somebody who is at high risk, either you have high blood pressure, you are worried that you're going to develop it, you have a family history of it, you have current heart disease, you have kidney disease. So my patients on dialysis, if they're eating too much salt, it really affects the dialysis because they hold on to too much fluid and then they're not able to get as much of what they need, the toxins in the fluid, removed because they just can't because they have too much salt intake. And so we know that reducing your salt intake, especially for these individuals, can lower your blood pressure. And so most people say, oh, I don't add salt to anything. I'm not getting that much salt. But salt in particular doesn't usually come. I mean, it comes from table salt, but most people that I see, every single one of them will tell me that they don't use a salt shaker. And when we go through of how they're getting their salt, it's usually based on foods that are convenient for them. And so we know that the more convenient the food is, the way that it's convenient is that that food will probably have been pre-cooked and salt was probably added to the food to preserve it and maintain its freshness. And also we know that if you're eating out at restaurants, that's also going to increase your salt intake. If you're somebody who doesn't worry about high blood pressure and you don't have a family history of high blood pressure and it's not a concern for you, then you probably don't have to limit it. But again, that's up to your doctor because everybody is individual. For me, my salt is usually okay, so I don't worry about it. However, if you're somebody who does have to worry about it, then these are just some considerations I want you to think about. So we as individuals, especially if you live in the States, the recommendation from our body here is the American Heart the American Heart Association. And the recommendation is about 2,300 milligrams a day. But really the limit is ideally is to be closer to lower than that, like maybe like 1,500 milligrams for most adults. In the United States, most people consume far too much sodium, closer to about 3,400 milligrams per day. So the recommendation is 2,300. The intake is 3,400, but I suspect it's much, much higher than that. And so we don't worry so much about adding more salt because we know that we're probably getting it from a lot of the food that we're already eating. And why high blood pressure and added salt is detrimental is that it can put you at risk for enlargement of your heart, headaches, kidney disease. It can put you at risk for a stroke, heart failure, kidney stones, osteoporosis. And so we know that it can also lead to, if you don't have those diseases, it can lead to increased water retention. So you may notice that you ate something that had a lot of salt in it, and then you had puffiness, bloating, weight gain. So it has some impact on your health. And so if you're somebody who doesn't worry about high blood pressure, then you're probably the next day drinking more water, doing something to hopefully get rid of that extra salt that you perhaps took in. Now, before we move further, I do want to acknowledge too that your body needs salt to function. And there is that you can have too little salt too. So I'm not saying like, hey, cut it out. I'm saying that use your best judgment on what you think you're eating, and then also kind of putting that in relation to what is happening with your disease states. So for me, I use MyFitnessPal some days to log my fiber intake, but also on there, it will have my salt intake. And my salt intake is usually pretty good because I cook food from home most days. However, if I get something that's already prepackaged, like if I get chicken that's prepackaged or breaded, I notice that my salt intake will either be exceeded because of the food that I'm eating. And so for me, that is not a problem, but for you, it may be. And so for you, you do not want to add more salt to what you're doing, especially if you're not somebody who requires more salt. So let's talk about the first claim. The first claim is that it helps with dehydration. So usually with dehydration, you will need electrolytes, right, to help with that. If you feel like you're dehydrated, you are going to get either a Gatorade, or I have those little like IV hydration things, and I don't use them often, but I have them around in case my son is sick or if I'm not feeling well. And then sometimes I use them for other things too. But in those, they're basically like almost like a Crystal Light, like they're individual packets that you just rip off. And if you feel like, or I feel like I'm in a place where I'm dehydrated, then you can put them into water. In those little dehydration sticks or Gatorade in itself, you're going to get salt from that. That's the goal of it. It's hydrating you. But the difference with that and just putting a pinch of salt in your water is that usually you're also going to have other electrolytes in there to help replete you. In like the dehydration sticks, most of them usually have potassium with it because you need that. And then some of those sticks will have like vitamin B, vitamin C, different things that will hopefully put you back in balance so that you're in a place that you're hydrated as opposed to dehydrated. And the same with Gatorade too, right? Like you're going to have other electrolytes in there. You'll probably also have sugar in there to kind of help bring you back to the balance that you need. And so it's not just salt, it is other electrolytes too. Who would probably need some of these like hydration sticks or a Gatorade or to add salt to your water would be if you're somebody who is having chronic diarrhea, or you might be in a place that you're sick and you're not drinking as much as you normally would. Maybe you are having excessive sweating, you're a competitive athlete. Competitive athletes, like my nephew is a competitive rower. He is somebody who needs to replete his losses. Water alone for him probably wouldn't work because he is doing a lot of endurance. He's rowing for probably 2 to 3 hours. And so just repleting with water alone probably wouldn't be enough for him. Probably just putting salt in his water isn't going to be enough because he's going to need all the other stuff too. He's going to need the sodium, he's going to need the potassium, and he's going to need whatever else is probably in that glucose, like maybe added sugar or something like that to help replete his glycogen stores. If you're somebody who works outside and it's excessive heat and or maybe you're a firefighter or something like that, these are the people who are going to be worried about their hydration status. If you're somebody who is exercising more than 90 minutes, or you're exercising when it's really hot and you're sweating a lot, this is when you're going to need your electrolytes. And again, you're not going to just need salt. You're going to need much more than that. I see a lot of like with sports, especially kids sports, that like kids will play for an hour and maybe the sport isn't a lot of endurance. So maybe they're playing like baseball and they're playing for an hour. Again, this is younger kids because my kid is 7. So he's probably playing like an hour and a half. He probably doesn't need Gatorade because he's not doing a lot of endurance. He's kind of like back and forth. And he also isn't playing for that long. Now, if it was really hot outside and he was dehydrated, sure, I would 100% say, have a Gatorade, do what you need to do. But if you're somebody that is doing something endurance, like if you're doing soccer or you're doing soccer or football for everybody else not in the States, where you're doing a lot of endurance, you're going to need some kind of electrolyte repletion. You're not going to probably be able to replete yourself just with water alone. And so that's where I would say adding something and not just salt, like adding an electrolyte drink is going to help you. It's going to replace the losses that you have. I sometimes notice that if I'm exercising a lot and I'm not drinking enough water, like somehow during the day, if I'm drinking more tea or I'm doing something, it's just not enough, that I'll get into these jags where I need one of those like dehydration sticks because I can tell I'm totally dehydrated and I'm thirsty and I can't catch up. And sometimes if I do one of those IV hydration, well, it's not actually IV hydration, but you know, those electrolyte sticks to actually like give me the lights that I need to kind of replete me. And usually just to do one of those is enough. But again, that has 600 milligrams of sodium in it. So I probably need that replacement because I've probably lost it somewhere along the way. But I don't do it often. I just do it when I feel like I'm dehydrated and I can't quite catch up. And so for you, in terms of hydration status, I would think about the same thing. Do you need to do something beyond water? I would take the whole pinch of salt off the table and kind of start to transition to, do you need water or do you need something that is more of an electrolyte repletion? And also, I wanted to point out that one of the other things that they talk about when it comes to adding a pinch of salt is that it helps detox and cleanse. Well, we know what really is going to help detox is your liver. And so what I would say to you is that in terms of what my verdict would be to manage what you're doing with just water alone. It's probably enough for most people that are exercising an hour a day or less. You can usually replete your losses with water alone. Now, if you feel like you have these jags where it's really hot outside or something like that, you're going to know. You're probably going to have headaches. You're not going to feel that great. Your pee is going to be pretty dark. Just kind of take that into consideration, you know? But I would suspect that if you're not doing heavy duty exercise more than an hour a day for you or your kids, that you can usually replete your losses with water alone. So my verdict would be to do that, to do water and watch your pee color. When it comes to water, recommendations are based on body weight. So the general rule of thumb like I could calculate each of your individual body weights, but one of the general rules of thumb to make sure people are getting enough water is just to drink half of your body weight in fluid. So if you feel like you're already drinking enough water and you're still feeling dehydrated, then that's where I would go, not for adding a pinch of salt, for adding some kind of electrolyte repletion. But again, it's important for you to understand all the other things that are happening in your body to know what works for you. And part of this is trying to figure out how that works for you and how that relates to you, and trying to figure out, okay, should I do this or should I not? Now, the second thing we're going to talk about is the diet soda. And why we're going to talk about diet soda is that, again, people have opinions about soda and diet soda, and I hear it all the time. I hear people with opinions that shouldn't have opinions, or that just don't have enough knowledge and are just spouting one point of view. And so I want to kind of give you both sides of the story, and I'll also tell you what I do. But basically, when it comes to diet soda, the reason why people like it is because it is a very sweet product, and it typically is very low in calories. And so mostly due to the high sugar intake that's out there and because of the high risk of diabetes, we have incorporated these things into how we eat because it doesn't have calories. They're non-nutritive. They don't have calories. They were brought to fruition to help with people who have diabetes and to also help with weight loss, because the idea is that they will control your blood sugar levels for longer so that you won't have the spikes as regular table sugar, and that also you will be able to lose weight. There are different kinds of non-nutritive sweeteners. There are things like saccharin, which I think probably is one of the oldest that everybody knows about. And saccharin was off the market for quite a bit because basically they had done studies in labs back in the day, and they found that it caused bladder cancer in animals. However, since that time, it has been back on the market because I think scientists have basically refuted that claim and said that the doses are so high that you need to consume in order to pose a threat. Another one is acesulfame K, and that is something that you are going to probably have in your soft drink. So this is one of the things that I want you to know about soft drinks, is that most soft drinks are going to have a variety of different sugar substitutes or non-nutritive sweeteners in them, especially if it's a diet, right? And each country is different. So you could have a Diet Coke that is made in the States, and maybe it's different than what you're going to get in another country because perhaps that country doesn't allow the sweetener that they allow in the States in that product. So mostly you're going to have acesulfame K in your sweetener and any diet soda that you do. Acesulfame K is usually 200 times sweeter than sucrose, and it is usually in soft drinks, and it's usually with, it tends to be, sometimes it's alone, but it can be with other sweeteners too. Aspartame is another one, also like acesulfame K. It's 200 times sweeter than sucrose, and it's been used in most products. Usually the products cannot be heated because it can't be stabilized, so they don't usually use it in cooking. Sucralose is one of the ones that is more on the market. And sucralose, why people like it, it's man-made, it's 600 times sweeter than sugar, and it's heat stable. And so when it comes to sucralose, research shows that it has no impact on blood sugar, and it is deemed safe for people in all populations. Although I probably still wouldn't use it in children. I'm usually still a little bit leery about this because I don't know. I think it's different when it's a child, you don't really know you just don't know what you're putting in them. And there's so many other things where they're probably getting sugar substances in terms of non-nutritive sweeteners, because it tends to be like in baked goods. So I tend to not particularly love it in different drinks for kids because they're already getting it from a variety of products that are out there that you probably don't even know you're getting it from. And another one, the last one we'll talk about is cyclamate. And cyclamate is something that if you live in the States, you're not going to recognize it because it is banned in the US. There was some old studies linking it to an increased cancer risk. So right now it's not here, it has been banned, but it is being used in other countries. And there is some, I don't know, there's some things that they're saying that they're petitioning to have it back in the States. So I don't know what will happen with that. So now let's talk about these. So we have the acysulfame K, we have the which is like your sweet one or your sun netty. You have your aspartame, which is your NutraSweet or your equal. You have your saccharin, which is your sweet and low, your sucralose, which is your Splenda. Other ones out there that people always go to are like monk fruit in the raw or stevia products because they feel like it has fiber in it and it's probably a better sweetener. So what we know is that currently in the States, there's different sweeteners, non-nutritive sweeteners are allowed in the market, and the amount is different than what might be in another country. And we know that there are some people who cannot have sugar substitutes. So we have people who have a disease called phenylketonuria, and you will notice that on all of the packages that have non-nutritive sweeteners, they'll say that if you have phenylketonuria, also PKU, that you can't have any drinks with aspartame because it's related to complications related to that rare genetic condition. We also know that if you have some kind of like bowel disease, if you're using sugar substitutes, they may make your symptoms flare. But again, it's very individualized. And it really depends on the sugar substitute. If you're using like a sugar alcohol, so that tends to be like sorbitol or xylitol or erythritol, those sugar alcohols that end with the OL, those we know cause a lot of GI distress. So if you are somebody who has bowel disease, that might be what is causing your symptoms of having a flare contribute to that. Now, why these non-nutritive sweeteners are on the market is because it is helpful for people who have diabetes. That's what the research shows in an effort to reduce their hemoglobin A1C. And also, it tends to be used for weight loss. Some of the research out there based on these non-nutritive sweeteners are basically some of the research on these non-nutritive sweeteners. So remember, if you're doing some kind of diet soda, you're going to get some kind of sweetener, non-nutritive sweetener in that product in order for that product to not have the calories that you're trying to avoid if you're drinking it. And usually, like I was going through some of the different Coke products, and so Coke Zero typically has just acysulfame K. Diet Coke may have aspartame. Diet Pepsi, they replace aspartame with sucralose, but then they also have acysulfame K. And so different soft drinks are going to have different non-nutritive sweeteners in them. We know that some of the health concerns that we hear about these non-nutritive sweeteners were, like I referenced earlier, that saccharin was linked to bladder cancer in rats. But when they were able to do research on humans and not just rats, they were able to see that those findings weren't applicable, that the amount of saccharin that you had to have was just such a high dose that most people weren't consuming that anyway. We know that there is some research to say that daily use of artificial sweeteners can be linked to a higher risk of stroke, heart disease, and death overall. But it's hard to tease out if people are doing healthy habits with that, or if because they're not engaging in healthy habits, that's where the higher risk is. So is the risk related to other things, not just the diet soda, in the sense that they're not doing behaviors that will help them lower the risk? One of the things that I worry about when it comes to sugar substitutes is the sugar substitutes and the gut microbiome. So we know that there is this gut and brain communication that happens, but it's all very new data. And researchers are trying to see if sugar substitutes affect cravings for sweets. And that's a big thing, and how it impacts your gut microbiome. Now, gut microbiome is something that has been recently studied, so we don't have any parameters yet. We don't know what a normal gut is supposed to look like. We don't know what is supposed to be in there. We don't know what bacteria is good. We don't know what bacteria is bad. So there's just not enough research to have a claim based on this yet. We know that sugar alcohols, stevia, and even monk fruit, which are, which I think a lot of people tend to think, oh, these are so much healthier. We know that they cause gas and bloat and diarrhea. And especially if you have bowel disease, you may not be able to tolerate them. I know that I do not. So in general, if you're going to take sugar substitutes, one of the things about sugar substitutes and why people like them is because the dose is so much smaller than you would need for regular sugar. So because they're so much sweeter, 200, 600 times sweeter than sugar, the amount that you need is much smaller than sugar. And so if you want to use sugar substitutes, you can use it. But I would say that I would kind of look at what you're doing and what is happening in your life. One of the other things that I think about sugar substitutes is that for me, if I am drinking diet soda, I go through these periods where I notice that then I start to crave it. And so then I'm like, oh, I need diet soda. Oh, I need another one. And I don't particularly love that. And so for me, I have to have I try not to do it every day, maybe once a week, because I know that that is something that I experience when I consume it. One of the other things that I worry about in addition to microbiome is about bone loss. So remember, I work in a dialysis clinic and I have a history of fractures of my hip. So when I was dealing with my hip fracture, I was avoiding soda, all soda, especially brown soda, because we know that colas, especially colas in general, can also lead to fragility in your bones. So I was very aware of that. So I was trying to preserve my bone health. But as a woman, and as you go towards perimenopause, or maybe you're like me and you're already in menopause, we know that once you're in menopause and your estrogen is decreased, that you are going to have more bone loss. And so if you're consuming products, especially brown products that have a lot of phosphorus in them, such as Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, you are going to be more at risk for osteoporosis or osteopenia or just bone loss in general. For my dialysis patients, we talk about soda a lot because bone health is a big concern, especially if my patients are drinking a lot of colas, because the colas, diet or not, have a lot of phosphorus in them and can also then speed up or just contribute more to osteoporosis and bone fragility. And so what I would say is think about those kind of things when you're consuming any kind of soda. So first of all, are you in a place that you drink soda? How often do you drink it? And what is the reason that you're drinking it? My mom is somebody who has diabetes. She used to drink soda all the time. She stopped. But she was always eating, like using sucralose or Splenda with everything that she consumed. She felt like it aided her having a lot of gas and bloat, so she stopped and went back to sugar. Now for her, as long as her hemoglobin A1C stays the same and controlled, that is probably a pretty good option for her. However, if her hemoglobin A1C is really high, I think that she then would have to start to figure out if she needs to go back to some kind of sweetener, because the goal here is for controlled diabetes. And if her diabetes isn't controlled, it is then going to contribute to other chronic diseases. It's like trying to figure out like the risk benefit there. Now, I have my sister-in-law is somebody who has no she has no diseases at this point. She doesn't have diabetes. She doesn't have prediabetes. She doesn't have anything with her blood pressure. She noticed that when she drank Coke Zero, and at the time she was drinking it, she lived in Switzerland, so she lived overseas. And then when she came back to the States, noticed the same thing, that she was having joint pain when she drank Coke Zero. So she stopped and her joint pain went away, but she drinks regular Coke. She doesn't have a weight issue. And so she can get away with that. I then have a coworker who lost a ton of weight on keto. She drinks non-nutritive, like she probably does like a Splenda in her coffee every morning. And for her, that is important because she was able to lose the weight, and it's a lot of weight. She probably lost over 50 pounds. And so her priority is continued weight loss. And so what I would say to you is really starting to figure out where you shake out, but what's going on for you at this point in time. For me, I had a hip replacement, so my bone is better. I will do diet soda, but I limit it. I don't have it. I probably have about once a week. If I consume it more than that, I notice that I start to have a craving for it. I don't particularly love that. Also, I worry about my gut microbiome. So I am not then going to, I just don't want to contribute to that if I don't have to. So I have switched from like my tea that I drink every day. I just use regular milk. I don't use any sugar substitutes or sugar. That's kind of what I've done. And so you have to figure out what works best for you. I would say for children, probably not to use it so much because they're probably getting it from other sources and they probably don't require as much of it because they are smaller. So again, I think you have to figure out what is safe for you. If you are somebody who has a history of prediabetes or have diabetes, and that is a way that you can manage it is by using sugar substitutes and drinking diet soda, then that's probably okay. If you're somebody who doesn't have that problem and it's really basically up to you. All of this is trying to figure out what works for your life. You starting to become the expert on you. When it comes to sugar substitutes, there's nothing that's right. There's nothing that's wrong. But just notice that anything that you consume is going to be labeled as low sugar or no sugar, and that you're going to be able to get what you need from whole foods such as fruits and veggies. That's going to give you the nutrients that you want. So having some kind of artificial sweetener can help people enjoy the sweetness of something without the added calories. And if you use it in moderation, it can be okay. So I think that you need to start to figure out what your current medical condition is, what your past medical history is, what are you at risk in terms of disease development, and start to figure out and tease out what works for you, what makes you feel good if you consume it, and what doesn't make you feel good. And then decide based on those things, because you're becoming more of an expert of what works for you and what is good for your body, then you can decide, okay, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do this, as opposed to just hopping on the bandwagon. So I hope this helped sort out some of the information that is out there. And certainly if you have any questions about other trends that you see out there, you can email me or find me on social media at Instagram at Whole Health Empower, and all of that information is in my show notes. But certainly kind of hit me up if you're something that you want me to kind of tease through and see the pros and the cons. And don't forget that if you are a woman over 40, grab my freebie about 5 things you should be doing today to help with your health as you get older. That link is also in the show notes. So I hope you guys have a great week, and thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you found value in this podcast, please rate, review, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends. Together, we can take tiny, imperfect steps towards creating the whole health we desire and deserve. Don't forget to grab your freebie. You can find the link in your show notes or over at trishard.com. I'll see you back here next week.